Welcome everyone. Today we're going to do a motherboard removal and transplant of another motherboard into this case. Obviously first you want to put on your static strap and start removing connectors and items that you're going to need to remove from the board in order to transplant it safely. Here we're removing the video card. We've started by unplugging the power connectors on the right hand side of the device and now the screw. There may be a tab below the video card which you'll need to also pop either up or down with my finger shown here, and then you should be able to pull the card straight out. Now that the video card is out, now would be a good time to take note of what cables you're going to need to plug into the new board once you put it in here. If you need to label things, now is a good time to do so. We're going to remove the RAM that was in this board. Also, there's a wireless desktop adapter that is plugged into the PCI port. So we're going to remove that now as well. Undoing the screw, undoing the antenna portion on the back of the case, and then once that's complete, pull it straight out. Next we're going to start removing the power connectors. Here's the 4-pin that's usually to the left of the CPU. Try to keep that out of the way. Then here is the 20-pin or 24-pin power cable that's usually to the right side of the board. Here we're going to start removing the serial ATA cables as well as the front panel connectors and the USB port connectors for the back panel. There's also a front fan in this case, which I have just removed, and a few parallel ATA CD-ROM, DVD-ROM drives. So now a quick verification that all cables have been unplugged from the board that are not staying with it. In this particular case, I am leaving the processor on this board as the board I am putting in has a processor already on it. Now we're going to begin removing the screws from the board. This is a micro ATX board. It still uses the ATX configuration for screws. However, it just does not use all of them. So an ATX board would extend almost to the bottom of this case and further over to the right. So it does not use the screws that would be further over to the right and lower. In the toolkit I'm using a micro claw tool with a plunger at the end. It makes for easy removal of screws that are in between capacitors and things like that are on the board. As long as the screws are released from the stays below, you can pull the board up with the screws on it. but sometimes they get lost in the bottom of the case or something like that if there's a additional tray. So I try to pull all the screws off beforehand before I remove it from the board. Now that we have all the screws removed, we should be able to slide the processor and board together out to the right hand side off of the back panel. Make sure as many wires and wire loom is out of the way so that you can slide it to the right and angle it up out of the back of the case. Now we have an empty case to put our new board in. Okay, so we're moving to a different board here with the processor already intact, as I stated before. We're going to slide this in the same way we slid the other one out. Also make sure to replace the back panel between the two boards, otherwise the cutouts they don't match up. At this point I decided to reroute this fan cable even before I had the board screwed in. At any rate, once you've secured the board, you can start rerouting cables. As you'll see, this cable was actually further over to the right of the last board, so this one's pretty stretched, but it does reach for that front fan on the bottom section. So we'll begin now by putting these screws into their respective holes. These are the same holes that the other board had. It just depends on if there are capacitors or PCI slots or things of that nature in the way that it can become a little more difficult. Putting this top corner one in, I actually ended up using that plunger claw tool that I told you about earlier and putting the screw and starting it into the stay in the end, because it was a little difficult to get the screw in there in the first place. Now that we have the boards seated in there and screwed to the stays, we can now begin rerouting our cables, reseating the RAM, which I'm doing here. As I stated earlier, sometimes the connectors are in a different spot, so planning your cabling is definitely useful before you get to this point. Sometimes this power connector, as you can see, I had to actually turn backwards because the clip is on the other side in this particular board. So these are all things that you need to plan for when you're replacing the board. We're going to plug the parallel ATA cable back in. Here are our front panel connectors, and we're going to need the manual to plug those in because, as we all know, the typing on the printed circuit boards are very small and quite hard to read, especially at this distance. So after we get all that sorted out, where the power switch and the reset switch goes, and all that sort of stuff, we can just plug those in to their respective ports using the user's manual. Now that we've completed plugging in the connectors for the front panel, we can now work on rearranging the serial ATA cables, the video power cables, as well as the USB cables for the back panel. So I'm going to go ahead and plug those in now. And these are all keyed cables, so you have to make sure you're plugging them in the correct way. Otherwise you're going to do some damage to the board and or the connector itself. At this point we're ready to put the video card back in. A lot of these cards now are very long, and especially in a mid-tower case it can become difficult to get them in there with other stuff in the way. However, this case was easy enough without removing anything to get the video card back in, slide it firmly into slot, and the locking connector on the PCIe slot down below will click. Now it's just a matter of rerouting those serial ATA cables to the bottom of the board. As you can see, the connectors, the black and red connectors down below, those need to be plugged in there. Check the keying on the connectors and plug them in accordingly. After we get this video card screwed in, we're going to take one last look around and make sure that everything is back together as it was. Plug in our last power cable, the 4-pin plug on the left side of the processor. It seems everything is back together.